Viewers, we are joined by Dr. David Frawley. He's an author, he's an astrologer, he's an acharya, and he's also a proponent of Hindutva. Some would say one of the world's leading proponents of Hindutva. Thank you for speaking to us here on Times Now, Dr. Frawley.
Thank you for inviting me again. I'm always very happy to be with you.
We're witnessing change. Many are calling it a Hindu renaissance in India. And we're also seeing the reaction of an unnerved left ecosystem that is finding it very hard to contemplate what all of this will amount to. There's, as a result of that, a heightened attack on Hinduism, what it means to be a Hindu. And this attack finds roots even from some of the most prestigious scholars internationally, for example, Dr. Frawley. Some would say even from the hallowed corridors of Harvard. And I've been reading a book by a leading intellectual here. I happened to interview him. We're talking about Rajiv Malhotra, and he has written quite extensively on this orchestrated denigration of the faith. But we'll come to all of that later. I just want to begin first by asking you to reflect on some recent events. The inauguration of the Mahakal corridor in Ujjain by Prime Minister Modi. How do you see the significance of this event in light of the current socio-political canvas of the country, which seems to be quite roiled?
Yes. Well, first of all, it is a very important event for many reasons. It is, of course, one of the great Shivalingas, and it is a wonderful, magnificent restoration that has gone on there. Now, Ujjain is important for various reasons. It's a very important cultural center throughout history. It also marks the center of India. And it's in some ways, you could even say the heart of India. And even in terms of study, for example, it was the prime meridian of time in India, basis of the astronomical calculations and all these related issues of timing, whether it's Panchanga, extending to the whole idea of time in India, which is eternity, which is Shiva, the Lord of eternity. So it's kind of resetting the clock of the nation, which is also then taking us back to reclaiming of the history and also envisioning the future. Again, a wonderful event and a restoration of India's cultural and sacred time.
Let's talk a little bit about this. Not just the Mahakal corridor in Ujjain, but we've seen, of course, the Kashi Vishwanath Dham in Varanasi or Kedarnath Dham in Uttarakhand and some of the other holy sites that are being reordered, restored. What do you make of this campaign for restoration of temples under the Modi government?
It is an extremely important agenda to reclaim India, Bharat's cultural and civilizational heritage. Temples also reflect the entire culture, the architecture, the art, even, of course, music, dance, painting, celebrations, learning, education. So it's this reclamation of India's civilization, not just the idea of India as a new political state. And Modi has the first government that is willing to take the effort, the time, the expense, and even the controversy to do it, because, of course, India's civilization is not well understood by the other countries of the world. And there are also various vested interests into keeping India down and to not have India's civilizational ethos comes up, because it brings into question what is going on elsewhere and provides a different model that creates various questions.
Dr. Frawley, let me quote the Prime Minister at a recent temple inauguration restoration ceremony. He says, "You must have seen the grand Ram temple taking shape, be it Vishwanath Dham at Kashi or Kedar Baba's Dham. Today, the spiritual and cultural story of India is being restored. These spiritual places are becoming mediums of new possibilities," unquote. What are these possibilities? Many people have linked these new possibilities to an aggressive, new Hindi and Hindu, I suppose, aggression on the national global stage. And they're saying it all ties up with the larger project of turning India into a Hindu majority state.
Well, let's look at it at a deeper level. There have always been two movements coming out of India in the modern world. The first was the spread of yoga, Vedanta, etc., through Swami Vivekananda, which has spread now even things like Ayurveda, Jyotish, Indian music and dance, Sanskrit, the culture, the civilization. And that is what people honor about India throughout the world. And we have in every major country of the world, we do have these communities that are dedicated to gurus, ashrams, or meditation, and the bringing of all these civilizational insights throughout the world. Then we had the independence of India at a political level, which began with this inspiration through Vivekananda. We can see that how it connected through Tilak, Aurobindo, and so many others, Gandhi. And then in independent India, we had the idea more of fashioning a modern political state along British, American, and other lines without necessarily respect for India's civilization, and sometimes with just a blatant continuation of colonial views of India, attempting to change India, put it down, not accept India's greatness, not accept it as a civilization. So both these movements have been going on. And now it's very important that under the Modi government, we see that the unification of the two, India arising as a great nation with democracy, with economic development, with diplomatic power, but at the same time, respecting its Dharmic civilization and continuing to share and support that throughout the world. For example, now we have Ayurveda Day coming up.
You speak in a recent article about why the restoration of timeless temples is important for New India. That's the title of your piece. And you talk about the policy of restricting Hindus from reclaiming or renovating their sacred sites and how it continued unbroken through the Mughal, British, and Nehruvian periods. And only Somnath managed to escape due to Sardar Patel's endeavors. Why did the new political dispensations after August 15, 1947 block this endeavor? Why did Nehru, for example, not embrace this endeavor?
Well, the reason is very clear. Nehru was very close to the British. He also had a very British education and view of India. He wrote a view on the discovery of India, which mainly quotes Western scholars, not the Indian tradition. So he wasn't comfortable with the idea of a Hindu India. And he also felt that that might politically go against him. So as a part of political support. And then he was allied with Marxist influences that also had that particular agenda. And so that alliance came up. And the India that came up after independence did not follow the inspiration of independence leaders. It followed a new vision of Nehru and the left.
Dr. Frawley, many people say that this campaign, for example, might have been put off right after independence because The need at that time was to emphasize unity in diversity and not a monoculture. That would have led to fragmentation. And what we are seeing today is a consolidation behind religion to push a monochromatic view on all Indians from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. And therefore, Nehru did what he did, and this is now a reordering of the deep secular ethos of our civilization.
Well, let's look at that more. First of all, India was fragmented and divided into Pakistan, and of course, then Pakistan divided into Bangladesh. Fragmentation was a fact. The Indian civilization had been under outside rule for some time. There was an expectation that India would revive its civilization. That's what Tagore wanted, that's what Aurobindo wanted, but Nehru didn't seem to want that. So that was the fragmentation in India itself and a movement away from the independence movement to a new kind of socialist India with connections to other countries, Soviet Union, etc., not so much to a Bharatiya heritage, and looking for the role model to, again, Britain, United States, rather than so much India's heritage. And this, of course, India's civilization is so deep, it's managed to endure, and now it is manifesting again because the Nehruvian influence has come down. It failed in many ways. The socialist, Marxist influence has come down because it also failed in many ways. And India is discovering that by denying the heritage of the country, you can't unite and raise the country. You can't deny its culture and then say, let's build a great India, a great future. And India must be India. India can't be another China, another Britain, another United States, another Pakistan, another Saudi Arabia. It has its civilizational identity that we need to preserve. So let India be India and let it have its own identity, its own independence of thought and culture, not just simply outer political independence.
Let's build on that, because some people say that this business of denying heritage has now come to mean rewriting history. So while we are awakening ourselves to our history that was perhaps suppressed by settler colonization, we're going the other extreme, and we're rewriting our history. And part of that is this push towards reclaiming, for example, our places of worship, which many people say is again an expression of a revanchist majoritarianism. And this is a critique that is put out from Harvard to many universities here in India, amongst many intellectual circles, and of course, political side, a political faction here in our country. How do you view this?
Well, first of all, India's history books have not changed fundamentally. In fact, they should change. And after India's independence, India's history books were written by Marxists. They weren't written by the proponents of the Indian independence movement. And very little of India's history is there. The Cholas are hardly mentioned, for example. Mughals, of course, very prominent. And so the history needs to be changed. In fact, India is the only major country that has not rewritten its history significantly in the post-colonial era. You know, Native Americans are being honored today in history, but 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they were just denigrated as savages. So it's necessary that the pre-colonial cultures of the world have their history rewritten in which they're given their respect, because colonial rule was very denigrating to history, to culture. The British took down most of India's own native educational system, which increased illiteracy in the country. So there is definitely a need to rewrite the history of India, or to restore the history of India, and to have a history of India that reflects its civilizational ethos, that is not simply a shadow of outside civilizational influences, which, however good they may be, cannot understand a different civilizational system without studying its history, its philosophy, its spirituality. And so this change is very necessary. It's happening in other countries anyway. Let India be India, let it reclaim its history. It didn't begin in 1947. It didn't begin with the British. It didn't begin with the Mughals or the Muslims. And the historical influence of India went all over the world: the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Indonesians. So let us explore that and respect that.
Well, as I said, many people say that if you go too far, you will unravel the social fabric of this country. For example, if you go out there and start reclaiming temples, which have been either built over by mosques or other impositions, or if you go out there and reclaim active sites that are still being used by other communities. How do you view this?
Well, first of all, every country in the post-colonial era has reclaimed its cultural and sacred sites. We see that throughout Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, Hungary, Greece, Romania. Even the Saudis have removed many, if not almost all, Turkish mosques from the country, claiming that these were evidence or glorification of foreign rule. Pakistan has done none of the sort. Bangladesh really hasn't done that. And even Nepal, Sri Lanka, they've also reclaimed their cultural background, perhaps more effectively than India. So there's no reason or a logic for that. And then we also have to understand that these are not just places of religious conversion or religious domination. They are places of civilizational greatness, like the pyramids of Egypt, you might say, only they've endured more. So they need their respect. India needs to be India. Let us respect the civilization. India today is the world's largest democracy. We have greater religious diversity and freedom in India than any country in Asia and perhaps the world. So I think these outside forces don't want India to rise as a nation, because a strong India may question their political strength. And they don't want India to rise as a civilization, because that may question their civilizational ethos. Vivekananda, Aurobindo, even Gandhi could be quite critical of Western civilization and socialism, communism. So those voices also need to be heard.
Let me ask you this, because here we are having this massive debate on the Places of Worship Act that was brought in 1991 by a Congress government that prevents Hindus from reclaiming after 15th of August 1947 their places of worship. Now, do you think a legislation like this should be removed?
Let us first look at it again. There is no comparable such legislation anywhere else in the world. Pakistan didn't do it. Bangladesh didn't do it. None of the other countries have done it. I don't know of any country that has it. And then why are you freezing India's development at Independence Day? That means you're making the British Raj, the state of the British Raj, that is the state you're going to continue with. And if you're going to say we can't change temples since the British Raj, why should you be allowed to change monuments? Why should you be allowed to question the British Raj? So it has no legal precedent. Show me a law like that anywhere else in the world. And in addition, it's predated. It's done in 1991 to 1947. Are we going to predate laws in India back to 1947 and say that is the gold standard for the country overall? And then India is a huge country. temples going on for thousands of years in many different cultures and parts of the country, many different temples, some at various stages of development, renovation. How can you put them under one act? How can you make one statement that will cover thousands of temples? Each temple case is different, and it needs to be examined. There are temples that are like ruins or archaeological sites that need to be restored. There are temple sites like Ujjain, which were developed but not completely. The Marathas and the Hindus in the 18th century brought back temple building, and they restored a number of these temples. They half restored Kashi Vishwanath. But when the British came in, they defeated the Marathas about 1819, I believe. They stopped the process. They weren't necessarily against it, but they didn't support it. So in a way, we're also continuing traditions that began after the Mughals. And it's very necessary that India can reclaim its civilization. Because again, these temples are the history, and they were famous and well-known long before the Mughals or other groups took them down. Some were taken down many times and restored. So certainly the place for restoration is there. At the same time, each case is different. We can't just ask for all mosque or whatever to be taken down, or we can't say that because certain temples were taken down that we must have conflict between the communities. And the last point I want to make, we're also building new temples. There is this wonderful Akshardham in Delhi that I helped with years ago. We need to build new temples, fine. We need to restore the monuments. And there are certain famous sites like Ram Janmabhoomi, Kashi Vishwanath. They have such historical precedents and traditions. You can't just move it elsewhere, or you can't just say, okay, we'll just build a new temple. The fact is the history has to be honored. And the history of India is including its temples as well as its culture. And they were connected to schools also. What about Nalanda? It also had its temples there.
Well, Dr. Frawley, you've just mentioned several countries that worked to reclaim their history and some of their own religious sites. But why is India being singled out internationally, or even here in our country, for in some ways embarking on some sort of a rescripting of secularism, a resetting of secularism, and taking this communal turn, divisive turn? Why is India getting shredded internationally and here in certain circles?
There are no real secular countries around India. You can call China a secular country, but the communism there is hardly tolerant. It's not a democracy. I think there are two things that have happened. One, India is rising, and that poses a threat. You'll notice since World War II, no major world power has come up. That is one thing. Secondly, we also see the Indian diaspora has been very successful educationally, in terms of affluence and so forth. But that has also caused certain jealousy to arise in various communities. And even more important, the old Nehruvian Marxist rulers and mentality, which is still in a lot of the media, has lost power. So they're looking for their colonial support to bring themselves back to power by promoting the idea of India as intolerant and, of course, destructive. Compare India with Pakistan. In Pakistan, you have to be a Muslim to have an office in the government at all. People complain about, Muslim journalists in India, who, by the way, are well known, are not treated well and are being restricted. There are no Hindu journalists in Pakistan. They're not even recognized. They don't even have a voice. So let us put that into perspective. And we also see Hindus under attack in UK, Canada, and even the United States at a level of personal rights or temples being defaced. So this is not an issue of India being intolerant. It's an issue of a new India. And India cannot deny its past. It cannot deny its culture. And Western civilization is not giving up its civilization in order to be global. It may be correcting certain racist ideas and presentations, but its basic philosophy and politics is going on. So the world will have to deal with the new India, and it will certainly help the world overall.
My last two questions, let's talk a little bit about these forces inimical to India's rise, breaking India forces, some people call them. And I'm referencing here Mr. Rajiv Malhotra, who of course lives in America. He's just come out with a new book called Snakes in the Ganga, and I happened to be at a function and I spoke to him about it at the book launch and interviewed him. He said, and in his that work, very well researched, very deeply researched, says that there are institutions, for example, like Harvard, that have invested a great deal in trying to create some sort of impression internationally about India, and of course sows the seeds of dissension, etc., through scholarship to divide India. How far would you agree with that thesis? Have you encountered this?
I would agree with that pretty much overall. Although I would say the university level is not so black and white. For example, the Harvard Medical School has been studying yoga and Ayurveda. And even the physicists, et cetera, have been looking into Vedantic thought. It is the humanities. As you may know, in the United States, there are more Marxists in the humanities in universities than there are Republicans. So that can tell you what has gone on there. And there has been an agenda, and we have an alliance of the Indian Marxist with the American Marxist and leftist. That's been going on for a long time. But the Indian Marxists have kind of gone to the Western Marxists to say, please save us, because the Hindus are rising and we don't have the strength that we had anymore. Even in Kerala, you go there, you find Che Guevara. You don't find the great gurus of India, and you find the Marxist in America bringing out people who are staunch Marxist communists, who are head of communist revolutionary parties, but they're presented as liberal Democrats, not as Marxist communists. So it is there. It needs to be addressed, and it's being emphasized or strengthened by various prejudiced views. And again, the jealousy of the Indian community's success, the power of India rising as a nation, and it can gain support from various groups, China, certain other groups that don't want India to rise. So it is a fact, and it's been going on all along. The people who wrote the textbooks about India in the West were colonialists, and they continued a colonial view. And even today, in fact, at no point have the American textbooks in talking about India even really introduced India's gurus or India's yoga Vedanta as India. They've either ignored them or they've turned them into local factors. However, there is support. More needs to be done. I wouldn't portray it as black and white, but it is a definite problem that needs to be addressed.
So all their efforts right now are focusing, and my last question to you, on dismantling Hinduism, which they see as the basic problem. They say that, look, you have a sort of Brahminical ordering of society, and that means that Dalits and Muslims and other communities, denominations which are in minority here in India, are being denied of their basic rights, and they will list certain crimes that happen to make their case. What do you make of this?
Well, I would say there's a point to it to some degree, but it's largely a lot of hype and propaganda. Modi government has done more for Dalits, had more Dalits in the government, has done more work with the poor, the backward classes. One of our friends, Guru Prakash, who is a Dalit leader, went to the United States recently and addressed some of these groups. He found that a lot of them don't even have Dalit voices in them. They're mainly there promoting a certain political agenda. And as we know, Brahmins are hardly a monolithic presence in India. Mostly they're Brahmins by name. We have Brahmins who are among the poorest of the poor. And we have quotas not even allowing Brahmins in the education system without very, very high scores. So this is kind of projecting certain stereotyped intolerances, hoping to arouse unquestioned prejudices in others. Unfortunately, in the West, people are not well educated. They don't know much about history. They don't know much about India, so they might believe colonial stereotypes. On the other hand, we see the Indians running Silicon Valley. We see Indian CEOs among a lot of the major companies in the world. And that actually frightens some people. The British used to say the Indians are too poor, and now they're saying the Indians have too much money. So the anti-India paradigm has changed somewhat, but it has its ground, but it needs to be challenged. And the main issue is these guys are not allowing another point of view to come in. But the Indians are speaking up. Listen to what Jaishankar is saying. Now the foreign diplomats cannot just put India down and treat India as like a small country in another continent that we'll speak down to and pontificate to. India is a great Dharmic civilization. It's still inspiring the world, and we need to honor it. Certainly, India can be criticized. It needs improvement in many areas, but it is certainly going forward. It's helping many countries in the world. It's reaching out. I would say Modi seems to have more friends among the leaders of countries in the world than any other world leader today. And India needs to be allowed its voice. One thing I don't like seeing today is now people are saying everyone has to take a side in this Russia-Ukraine war. In World War II, even countries in Europe like Sweden and Switzerland were neutral. In the Cold War, many countries were neutral. So each country has to be allowed its national ethos, its national point of view, its geopolitical and economic concerns. And we're no longer at a time in which Western civilization or European American civilization is the only one. It's very important, very great civilization, but we have to bring in all the others. And India is very important there, and have a dialogue of civilizations, not simply an imposition of one civilization over others, however good it may be. There's a lot of good and greatness in other civilizations. And India is bringing a yogic, meditational, natural healing, so many higher states of consciousness studies, world peace, universal awareness. It has so many deep teachings that the world needs today. So let's look at those. Why aren't you studying or quoting Vedanta? Why are you always going after this kind of Brahmin caste? Why aren't you looking at Shankar or modern gurus, Sri Aurobindo? Then they came to the West, Yogananda, all these people. So have a balanced view. India is not a threat. They're not invading anybody. They're not terrorizing anybody. They're not in your prisons. They're not going after your girls and all these things. They're contributing. At the same time, they have a power of their own. And India's civilization can help. It's not a threat. And Hindu nationalism, Hindus haven't invaded any country and imposed Hinduism on it. There's not even a single definition of to what Hindutva is. And it just basically means Hinduism with another, twa root, added to it. So let's take a balanced view and look at this hysteria, anti-Hinduism, as based upon ignorance. How many of these people can even explain the prime principles of Upanishads, Gita, Vedas, Vedanta, yoga, and all the rest of it? Fact is, the new India is rising. It's a cultural, spiritual, democratic, and civilizational force. Let us welcome it, bring it in, have dialogues, share, and so we can bring the entire world civilization up. Because right now, unfortunately, it seems to be going down, not so much because of India, but because of the old political infighting, going back to the Cold War, going back to World War II. Let's look forward, and India has a voice to give, and Narendra Modi is giving a very positive image, whether it is ecology, economy, or world peace.
Well, as Mr. Mohan Bhagwat, the RSS chief, said a few days back, there is a third way, and that's the India way. Viewers, it's been delightful to be speaking with Dr. Frawley. Thank you very much for taking the time out, and have a happy Diwali, Dr. Frawley.
Happy Diwali also. May that light come, may the light of Dharma come to all, and may India's light arise along with the light throughout the planet and the universe.
Thank you. Thank you.